Weight classes were created to keep fighters safe. The idea was simple. A 155-pound fighter shouldn't have to face someone who weighs 200 pounds on fight night. But fighters found a way around it. They dehydrate down to the limit, step on the scale, then balloon back up overnight.
It's sanctioned cheating.
Yeah,
it's sanctioned cheating,
absolutely.
and it's cheating at a much higher scale even than PEDs.
And when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong.
You're a professional fighter. It's not hard, is it?
Fighters are pushing their bodies to the edge of organ failure just to step on a scale, and the system keeps rewarding it. So why do UFC weight cuts keep getting more dangerous? In the early UFC, there were no weight classes at all. You'd see a 400-pound sumo wrestler fighting a 216-pound kickboxer, and the whole point was to see if technique could beat size. By the late 1990s, regulators forced the UFC to introduce divisions. The idea was simple enough. Weight classes would level the playing field and reduce the risk of insane mismatches. And for a while, it worked the way it was supposed to. Fighters would gradually lose 5 to 10 pounds over a training camp, mostly through cutting fat and improving their conditioning. They'd show up on fight day close to their natural weight, maybe a few pounds lighter, and that was it. That gradual, measured approach is what the sport was built around. It's also what some fans probably still think happens. But cutting weight works because the human body is roughly 60% water.
The reason water weight is the biggest thing cut is because it can be lost quickly and replaced quickly.
If you know how to manipulate hydration, sodium, and carbohydrates, you can drop shocking amounts of weight in just a few days without losing lean muscle mass.
MMA, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, wrestling, boxing. Outside of those, what other sport has its athletes intentionally deplete themselves of water and nutrition just before competing? None. The answer is none, because it's stupid to do.
Once fighters realized they could dehydrate down to a weight class, step on the scale, then balloon back up overnight, the system broke.
The weight cutting is the #1 health issue in the sport, in my opinion.
There are people who lose 10 to 15 pounds from Thursday to Friday, weigh in on Friday, and replenish that 10 to 15 pounds of water weight from Friday to Saturday, and then compete Saturday night.
Boxing had already switched to 24-hour weigh-ins in the 1980s, thinking it would make things safer by giving fighters time to rehydrate. MMA adopted the same structure, but it inherited cutting culture from collegiate wrestling, where dehydrating in plastic suits and 90-degree rooms was treated like a badge of honor. So now you had a 24-hour window between the scale and the cage, and a generation of fighters who had been conditioned to see extreme weight loss as part of the job. Fighters stopped arriving at their natural weight and started gaming the system, cutting harder and harder to gain a size advantage over opponents who weighed the same number on paper, but nowhere near the same in the cage.
The answer to the question of why does anyone cut weight ever, because one person could cut weight, we all have to.
What was supposed to protect fighters became the thing putting them in danger. Hey, just a quick one, we've just crossed 60,000 subs, we're looking to hit 100k by the end of the year. So if you're enjoying the video, we'd appreciate if you could take the time to go subscribe. The 6-week training camp is where fighters are supposed to lose weight the right way.
In most cases, the process of losing weight for a fight takes place over many weeks through the course of a fight camp. If you know you have a fight in 8 weeks, then 7 out of those 8 weeks you are not cutting water weight, rather you're losing body fat slowly.
High training volume, calorie deficit, gradual fat loss. Most fighters drop 5 to 8% of their body weight during this phase, and it's completely manageable. But that's not where the real damage happens. The real damage starts in week 6 during fight week, when fighters stop trying to lose fat and start trying to flush water. A lot of the time they arrive at fight week still 10 to 15% heavier than their contracted weight, which means they have days to shed what should take weeks. And this is where things can quickly go wrong.
I don't know why, but when I cut weight, I can only see out of one eye. Well, I have like double vision. I think it's the worst part about cutting weight is always having to walk with one eye closed.
The method they use is called water loading. Early in the week, fighters drink massive amounts of water, sometimes 2 gallons a day, over 8 liters. The goal is to trick the kidneys into flushing water aggressively, like training them to operate in overdrive. Then, midweek, they cut water intake entirely. By the final 24 hours, they're not allowed to drink anything at all. Not a sip, not an ice cube, nothing.
This is the worst part.
Because this is the real fight.
Not just for me, I think for everyone.
But the kidneys don't know the water stopped coming in, so they keep dumping fluid at the same rate. The body starts cannibalizing its own hydration and the weight falls off fast. At the same time, fighters just completely get rid of carbohydrates and sodium from their diet. Every gram of glycogen stored in muscle is bonded with multiple grams of water, so when you deplete glycogen, you shed pounds of water weight without losing any actual muscle.
Glycogen is passive weight loss because we're not forcing it. Water loading is passive weight loss because we're not forcing it. And when I say force, I mean hot bath or sauna, something like that.
They also switched to low-fiber, liquid meals to empty their intestines completely, shaving off another pound or two of food bulk. And then, in the final 24-hour, well, this is where things get medieval.
When I'm cutting the weight, I'm a different person. I feel that I'm like, my mind goes different, my thought process is different, everything is so different at that moment. I'm not so kind when I'm cutting weight.
I'm not gonna lie to you, it takes a piece of your soul. It takes a piece out of you.
Fighters sit in scalding hot baths, sometimes with Epsom salts to pull moisture out through the skin. When they get out, they're immediately wrapped in towels, foil, or plastic sheets and buried under heavy blankets to keep their core temperature spiked. They call it the burrito method, and it forces the body to keep sweating even while lying still. Some fighters wear sweatsuits, thick rubber or plastic layers, and seal the cuffs with duct tape so no heat escapes. They'll sit in saunas for hours or pace around hotel rooms in full plastics, generating heat and spitting saliva into cups to lose the last few ounces.
I've had to sit in these before for hours. Like, haven't I had like hours when I've been sitting here contemplating killing myself, where it's that bad. Like where you're sitting there thinking, oh, do I even want to fight? Do I seriously want to do this to myself?
By the time they step on the scale, some of them can't see straight. They're so dehydrated their vision goes blurry, their blood thickens, and their organs are struggling to function. Doctors get worried when a patient loses 5% of their fluids.
Medical experts say any dehydration-based weight cut over 5% is dangerous.
Modern UFC fighters routinely cut 10 to 15%. In extreme cases, fighters have lost 18% of their total body mass in a single week. That's nearly a fifth of their entire body weight disappearing in days. For years, IVs were the safety net that made extreme weight cuts survivable. Fighters could dehydrate themselves to the edge of kidney failure, step on the scale, then immediately hook up to a couple liters of saline and feel halfway human again. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The IV allowed them to rapidly expand their plasma volume and force fluid back into their system faster than their gut could ever absorb it naturally. Fighters knew it was a crutch, and they relied on it completely. Daniel Cormier said on the record he was terrified when he heard IVs might be banned because he didn't think he'd be able to make 205 pounds without them.
I got a new nutrition coach because of the IVs and all that shit, so I had to change my nutrition coach. How are we gonna do it after the weigh-in? You know, what was I gonna do to make sure that I could compete the way that I competed before?
That's how essential they'd become. Then, in 2015, the UFC partnered with USADA and imported WADA's anti-doping rules, which included a strict ban on IV infusions over 50 milliliters. But the ban had almost nothing to do with weight cutting. USADA's concern was that large IVs could mask blood doping or make it easier to hide performance-enhancing drugs. Weight cutting was collateral damage. The rule was designed to catch cheaters, but it accidentally removed the most reliable tool fighters used to recover from extreme dehydration. And at the same time, the ban didn't actually remove the incentive to cut weight in the first place. Fighters still had every reason to drop 20 plus pounds so they could be bigger than their opponent on fight night. The only difference was, now they had to do it without their get out of jail card.
Now you got USADA stepping in and, you know, peeking their nose in places they know nothing about. They don't know how to cut weight. They don't know why we cut weight. They don't know how to even score a wrestling match and why cutting weight is part of wrestling, which is part of mixed martial arts. They don't see any of that. To me, USADA's stepping in there because it's about money. The more rules that they make, the more rules there are to be broken, the more money they have to make.
So instead of cutting less, fighters kept cutting the same extreme amounts and just switched to oral rehydration. They started chugging high sodium fluids mixed with fast carbs, trying to absorb the weight they'd lost over the course of 4 to 6 hours. The problem is that the gut can only process fluids so fast. Drink too much and you start vomiting all over the place, which just dehydrates you more. drink too slow, and you could still be dehydrated when you step into the cage. Research showed that even 24 hours after making weight, fighters relying on oral rehydration alone weren't fully recovered. They were just less dehydrated than they were on the scale. Meanwhile, the UFC Performance Institute started giving fighters shakes with precise sodium to carb ratios and easily digestible meals like rice and pasta.
In the first hour, it's a lot of liquid nutrition. A lot of very easily digestible proteins, amino acids, electrolytes, carbohydrates.
The goal was to spike insulin and force glycogen back into the muscles. It was scientific, but it was also slower and less reliable than an IV. So now fighters were cutting the same dangerous amounts of weight, but recovering from it with a method that left them more vulnerable going into the fight. The ban removed one safety valve without addressing the underlying problem, and the cuts just kept getting worse. Careers literally get destroyed by this. In 2014, former bantamweight champion Renan Barão fainted while getting out of a hot bathtub during his cut for UFC 177. He hit his head, was taken to the hospital, and the main event was scrapped. Dana White publicly blamed him and stripped him of his immediate title shot. Barão insisted he'd always cut about 22 pounds the same way, and the only issue was standing up too fast. His career never recovered, and he's not the only one who's had their career changed by weight cutting. It impacts so much of MMA today, whether it's fighters miss out on dream opponents or destroying their legacy trying to cut too much. Even Sean Strickland, one of the toughest fighters on the roster, regularly talks about how much the weight cut kills him.
This is really what we get paid to do, cutting weight. It's worse than fight.
So imagine what it's like for guys who cut even more than him. Habib Nurmagomedov was rushed to the hospital the night before he was supposed to fight Tony Ferguson at UFC 209.
Who made weight easily for his last fight. And the fight before that, obviously fell out of the fight because his body shut down and he had to go to the hospital to be rehydrated.
His liver and stomach were completely wrecked from dehydration, and the doctor told him flat out he almost died.
We say no fight. 100%, no make weight, no fight, no nothing. You need to stay hospital 7 hours. We have to make sure your body is good, you know. And but I feel like I almost died.
In 2019, TJ Dillashaw dropped from 135 to 125 pounds to challenge Henry Cejudo and showed up on the scale looking skeletal, sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, completely drained. He got knocked out in 32 seconds, and everyone blamed the cut. In 2025, Brian Ortega spent an entire night trying to make 145 pounds for a fight in Shanghai. From midnight to 8 a.m., he cut weight with his team, but by morning, he still had 1.7 pounds left to lose. So he climbed on a stationary bike, wrapped in plastics, and started pedaling. 20 minutes later, he lost consciousness. He was out for about 30 minutes and woke up in an emergency room with staff packing him in ice because his core temperature had spiked so high, his body was shutting down. He later admitted his body was telling him not to fight. Even some of the GOATs of the sport have come out and said they thought about quitting just because of the weight cutting process.
Welterweight was one of the few times I thought about quitting the sport. Weeks out from the fight, I was so stressed out about the weight cut that I almost called up Joe at the time and said, I can't do this, like this is terrible.
But the craziest weight cutting moment happened early this year during a live weigh-in broadcast for UFC 324.
135 and a half.
135 and a half. Hammer in the middle.
Oh,
He's fainted.
He's blacked out, yeah.
Oh, man.
Let's get a medical team in.
We're going to need a medical team relatively quickly on that.
Talk about timing. Michael Bisping was literally on camera criticizing fighters who missed weight.
So Cameron Smotherman came out. He was one of the first people to weigh in. He walked out. He stepped on stage, just like I'm doing right now. He made weight. So fair play to him for that. He made weight. Then he stepped off the scale and he face planted and was, I think, unconscious. He stepped off and just woof, boom, and you should have heard the sound, man.
The clip went viral immediately because it captured the entire problem. A former champion treating weight cutting like a professional formality while a young fighter literally collapsed a few feet away. The problem isn't that fighters don't understand the risks, it's that they can't afford to be the only one who stops, which is why you had guys like Conor McGregor killing himself to get to 145 pounds.
Listen, dude, I think that guy tortured himself to get down to 45 so hard. And when you looked at what he looked like when he was on the scale, when he was flexing, he looked like a goddamn zombie.
A skeleton.
It's horrible. So I think whether he complains or not about that, nobody rides for free. You do that to your body for a couple of years, you're doing some fucking damage, and it makes it harder to lose the weight afterwards.
If nobody cut weight, everybody would be safer and the matchups would still be fair based on actual size. But if one fighter stops cutting and their opponent doesn't, they're now fighting someone who's effectively a weight class above them. A lightweight who cut from 190 pounds down to 155 will rehydrate back up to 180 or 185 by fight night, which means a natural 155 pounder who doesn't cut could be stepping into the cage 25 to 30 pounds lighter than the guy across from them.
At the end of the day, you walk inside the octagon and you are the smaller guy.
Yeah, like Islam. Islam Makhachev is huge. I mean, that guy, how he makes 155 is, I don't understand it. Every time I stand next to him, like, how are you 155?
How much do you think he walks around?
He's got to be 190-ish, in the 190 range. He's got to be. That's what he looks like to me.
That's huge. It could literally be the difference between being able to control the clinch, defend takedowns, and absorb strikes. And there are plenty of other guys just like Islam who walk around much, much heavier than their fighting weight. At UFC 298, Jeff Neal weighed in at 170.5 pounds and stepped into the octagon the next day weighing over 200. Data from the California State Athletic Commission shows this is normal. Fighters routinely gain 8 to 18% of their body weight between the scale and the cage.
Is sanctioned cheating in a way, because if you know how to do it right, it is a massive advantage. The problem is you'd be amazed at how many people still take a stupidly dumb scientific approach, like non-scientific rather, approach to it, to where they're just spitting in the cup, they're getting in the sauna, they're dehydrating on frickin' Monday, and my guys are only dehydrating Thursday night. They're weighing in Friday morning. They're not eating, almost like they're fasting so soon. And like when it comes to anything in physiology, I would say this statement, but I especially mean this when it comes to weight cutting. And it goes, if you force the body, it'll react. But if you coax the body, it will respond.
But it's not just the size advantage, it's the career pressure. Contracts specify weight classes, and rankings require consecutive wins. One failed weight cut can cost you a title shot or a six-figure payday you might never get back.
That's why we do it. It's stupid, but the possibility of one person in the world cutting weight means that we all have to.
Part of the problem is that missing weight isn't treated as a medical issue. It's treated as a lack of professionalism. That's the culture. And there are always replacements waiting. If you pull out because you're trying to be safe and cut less weight, someone else will take the fight and do it the dangerous way. So fighters are stuck. They know the risks, but they also know that opting out while everyone else keeps cutting could end their career before a punch is ever thrown. Young fighters see champions cutting extreme weight and assume that's what it takes to be elite. Coaches normalize it because their coaches did the same thing. The arms race started decades ago, and no individual fighter has the power to stop it. So the obvious question is, why doesn't the UFC just fix this? But the answer is more complicated than it looks. Some state commissions have tried hydration tests to catch fighters who are dehydrated, but fighters just game the system. They rehydrate enough to pass the test, then dehydrate again right after. Or they manipulate sodium and carbs around the check-in window to skew the results. One championship created the most aggressive hydration testing in combat sports after the death of one of its fighters sets their passing threshold at a level that still allows for a lot of dehydration. Sometimes people suggest just switching to same-day weigh-ins, which sounds good in theory.
Chael Sonnen brought, I think, from what I've heard, probably the best solution because of his years of experience in wrestling. He proposed to do a weigh-in the day of the fight. So you what he proposes is basically you have weigh-in like the night before the fight, like we normally do. But now because the weigh-in it's in the morning, people say, "Oh, I have more time to recuperate," so they try to cut more weight. And it's sad to say, but sometimes I'm thinking, is like, are we gonna wait someone die out there to change things? I mean, it's ridiculous.
But fighters would still cut weight to gain an edge. It's just they'd step into the cage with no time to rehydrate. That means less fluid around the brain, which increases the risk of severe traumatic brain injury.
It is bad enough in grappling events, but in events where you're potentially getting hit repeatedly in the head while in a state of dehydration is just a recipe for a bad outcome.
The California State Athletic Commission has recommended adding new weight classes at 165, 175, 195, and 225 pounds to close the gaps that force massive cuts. Since 2019, California has even had the power to cancel fights if a fighter gains back more than 15%. But that's just one state commission, and the UFC can't enforce it globally without risking the cancellation of huge main events at the last minute.
I think they need to change not the individual, they need to change the system. I think the system can be made better. I'm not saying that Chael's proposition is the best, but I think it's the best that we know of right now.
In one championship, fighters submit their weight daily through an online portal to establish a natural walking weight, and their contracted division is based on that average. They also conduct multiple weigh-ins during fight week, including one just 3 hours before the event, with mandatory hydration checks at each stage.
I think what ONE FC is trying to do is they're doing hydration tests, and they do a series of them. I believe they do 3 leading up to the fight, which really... Was it Benavides was telling me this? Someone was telling me this, that they've essentially made it almost impossible for you to cut weight.
So are they doing hydration tests on weigh-in? At the weigh-in?
They're doing hydration tests 3 different times.
Okay.
3 different times leading up to the fight. I don't know the exact protocol, but what they've done is essentially made it so that you can't be dehydrated. Like you can't, when you weigh in, you have to weigh in at like if you're fighting at 170, but you get on the scale and you're fucking dying.
Yeah.
Like they're like, no, you're not really 170. Like, and that's really where it should be. This idea that the best way to fight is to cheat and to drain all yourself of fluids and then pretend that you're 160 pounds, then get back on the scale, 15 hours later at 185, that's fucking crazy.
One championship system isn't perfect, but it's stricter than anything the UFC does. The problem is that the UFC doesn't regulate itself in the United States. It's overseen by independent state athletic commissions, and any industry-wide change would require every state to agree and implement identical rules at the same time. As long as the UFC can say, we follow the commission's rules, there is no legal pressure to lead on this. And then there's the business side. If the UFC adopted a walking weight system overnight, almost every current champion would have to move up a division. Rankings would collapse, super fights would be ruined, and pretty much every record in UFC history would be meaningless. The promotion just doesn't want to live with that level of chaos, so the system stays the same. And the worrying thing is, the more things stay the same, the more dangerous the fight game becomes.
I hope it doesn't take someone dying before they figure this out.
In the early 2000s, cutting 10 pounds was considered aggressive. Now, fighters casually talk about cutting 14 to 16 pounds like it's just part of the job. So why do the cuts keep getting bigger? Part of the problem is that the sport professionalized in the wrong way. See, in the early 2000s, weight cutting was unsophisticated.
Back in the day when you're cage fighting, how many experts do you think they had access to? It's so low. But now anybody has Instagram, anybody can follow some people, anybody can check out YouTube, you can see some stuff and go, damn, I actually have had a lot more muscle soreness lately. It's something you can even Google. Like back in the day, these guys wouldn't even Google this stuff. You'd have to connect to your phone, internet. It would make a lot of weird noises for 30 seconds. It would load the page you want for another 60 seconds and just took forever. So I think a lot of it could be access to information. And now that people have access to information, more people applied that information and they got the benefits of that information. And then that spreads like wildfire in the world of athletes.
Fighters would starve themselves, sit in saunas until they passed out, and hope they survived. Sure, sometimes they didn't make it to the scale, but the lack of precision meant there was a natural ceiling to how far you could push it. Then the sport got serious money, and with that came serious infrastructure. Full-time nutritionists, performance coaches, hydration protocols designed by exercise physiologists. The UFC Performance Institute started publishing guidelines on water loading, sodium manipulation, and staged rehydration. Fighters could now engineer cuts that would have killed them a decade earlier. All that science made dangerous cuts survivable just long enough to get fighters to the cage. A 10% cut became the baseline, then 12%, then 15%. Now it's got to the point that fighters see temporary blindness and fainting as acceptable side effects of the process when they should be medical emergencies.
Guys are going to sleep completely dehydrated and sleeping through the night 20 pounds dehydrated. That's a lot of water coming from your blood. Your blood gets thicker, your heart rate slows down when you sleep.
When Cameron Smotherman collapsed on stage at UFC 324, he actually told fans he didn't even cut much weight. So collapsing after a mild cut is now normal enough that fighters feel the need to clarify they weren't even trying that hard. And to make things worse, every time one fighter successfully cuts an extreme amount and wins, it resets the baseline for everyone else in that division. If you're fighting at lightweight and you see someone rehydrate from 155 to 185 and dominate, you now have to ask yourself, can I afford not to do the same? The answer is almost always no. Fighters are willing to roll the dice with their own lives just to avoid being the smaller person in the cage. And as long as the incentive structure rewards the biggest person who can survive the cut, this will keep escalating. Not until the UFC changes the rules, but until someone dies on a scale instead of in a hospital, nothing is going to change. The UFC built a system where cutting extreme weight became essential for survival. And you know what else used to be essential? Watching the pre-fight press conferences. Now, they're boring and completely lifeless. So if you want to see how the UFC killed one of the best parts of Fight Week, make sure to watch this video next. Thanks for watching.